Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world. Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world. Welcome back to this week's edition of Impactful Teamwork. So excited to have you here again today, and I really hope that you've been enjoying the recent episodes and the guests that we have had on the podcast. So today you just have me, and I wanted to share with you the concept I've just recently come across that has really helped explain a number of my frustrations in the leadership space right now. Because at Business Horsepower, we are passionate about changing the way that we lead and run businesses, that we believe that the current ways that we run and lead businesses, often based on the hierarchical command and control structures, are not suitable for purpose in the 21st century, and we need a new model. And we are advocates for looking to nature for that model of new leadership. But I was in a couple of groups this week and talking with some colleagues from the GC Index in particular. And what they shared with me was a concept that is really prevalent out there. And it's a concept called zombie leadership. And I really love this term. And I wanted to unpack and explore with you today about zombie leadership and the impact it is having on teams. Because when we look at all the research, somewhere in the region of $400 billion is spent annually on leadership development. And yet a lot of that is very ineffective, and companies are not getting the results that they want from investing in leaderships. And there's a number of leaders that I meet that have become really frustrated that they've been investing in leadership development programs that aren't working. And it feels like they're moving round and round in circles. And this is when we get stuck in this zombie leadership mentality. Because what happens is that we're investing all this money into training and development of our people, which is amazing. And this is absolutely something we should be doing. But the challenge is some of the underlying principles that are guiding how leaders operate within businesses is built on old foundations. And I love an analogy that a good friend of mine, Jude Germain, put it in her LinkedIn post. And I want to share this with you because I think it's very relevant. And she talks about a good way to think about zombie leadership is that if you imagine you've inherited a grand historic mansion, and on the surface, it looks polished, it looks impressive, right? But as you step inside, the walls are cracked, the floors creak underfoot, and the foundation is crumbling. And no amount of expensive renovations is going to fix a weak foundation. And that is how she describes zombie leadership. And I think that's such a great analogy for us, because when we've got a rotten leadership structure, it's going to keep the organization in outdated, ineffective ways of thinking. And this is the typical, this command and control structure that I've been talking about for a long time with unbridled leadership principles, where the way that we're structured just isn't fit for purpose for the way that we want to run businesses. So the foundations in the command and control structure just don't work. And I think the interesting thing with zombie leadership that came out of all of the discussions that I had in a number of groups with people about this was the fact that it's really insidious because it looks really legitimate. It's got lots of great frameworks to it, lots of expensive programs go into it. But at its core, it's a relic of the past. And it persists not because it works, but because it benefits those in power. And Haslam, Abelson, and Riker in 2024 described zombie leadership as a set of debunked leadership ideas that refuse to die, reinforcing hierarchy and legitimizing the leadership industrial complex rather than enabling real impact. And this is something that we've seen for a while, where the current leadership styles and structures were built for the industrial age. And as a result, where we're working in a much more volatile, dynamic environment, where things are shifting so quickly, that those models just aren't, as we said, fit for purpose. So there's been quite a lot of research, particularly this research by Haslam Arif. They identify what they call 8 axioms of zombie leadership. And I thought it would be worthwhile in today's episode for us to just explore these and think about, as I'm talking about these, how they might be showing up in your organization. Because as I said, this zombie leadership, it's pretty much happening unconsciously. It is baked into the DNA of what we're doing. So we've got to become really conscious that it's happening in order to be able to make a change and do something differently. So the first axiom of zombie leadership that they talk about is that leadership is all about the leaders. So what do they mean by that? They mean that leadership is the preserve of those who occupy formal leadership roles and can be understood by focusing on leaders alone. We've often seen in organizations, the term leadership and management is often quite misaligned and used in the wrong sense. But a lot of people that I talk to, and when I talk to even middle managers, they don't feel that they're leaders. And that's not my view, but it's the prevailing view of zombie leadership, is that leaders are just the people at the top of the organization. And the key problem is that leadership is proved by followship and necessarily requires us to study and understand the followers. So we all know, and I see this time and time again in organizations, as I said, when you talk to people in the organization and ask them who the leaders are, often people within the organizations describe the leader as their maybe direct line manager. And people like direct line managers have such an impact on the effectiveness of teams and what's going on within the organization. And yet a lot of training and development is focused at that top leadership level where there's a lot of power, and a lot of people within the organization aren't seeing themselves as leaders. But as I said, my view is that everyone within the organization is a leader. The second axiom of zombie leadership is that there are specific qualities that all great leaders have. So some of the research suggests that qualities that leaders need to have are things like intelligence and charisma. And these are the things that equip people for leadership. But the key problem is, what matters is whether the people who are leaders are perceived to have these qualities by the followers. You could have a leader that has amazing intelligence and charisma, but if they're not perceived as having that by their team members, then that really null and voids that argument. So remember that as a leader, our behavior and our actions really demonstrate to people what type of leader we really are. So the third axiom is that there are specific things that great leaders do. So what do we mean by this? They mean that there's particular behaviors like being fair, initiating change, that are the hallmarks of effective leadership. But I don't know about you, but in all the teams that I've ever worked with, I'm not sure that I've always seen that to be true. And the research is suggesting that leadership requires their behavior to be attuned to the circumstances of the group being led. And this is why we talk a lot about emotional intelligence of leaders. And it's a topic that we'll be delving into next week with my guest, where we talk about the importance of emotional intelligence for leaders. But for me, great leaders are those that are able to adapt and navigate what is going on and actually step into the shoes of their team members to see things through the team members' perspective. The fourth axiom of zombie leadership is the fact that we think we're going to know a great leader when we see one. And in some organizations, there's definitely a consensus that some leaders are better than others. I think that's true at all. I think there's the opportunity that everyone can be a leader and everyone can be a great leader. But again, it's a question of perspective. The people that you're leading, do they see you as a great leader? Are you really supporting them? The fifth axiom of zombie leadership is that all leadership is the same. And again, that's just something in my experience that doesn't hold up, because I think leadership is different for everybody and everyone leads differently. Everyone has their own unique take on it. And in some cases, that's actually why leadership can be challenging to teach and train, because it's very dynamic. It's very unique to each individual. We all bring our own personality and our energy to leadership. And therefore, it's different for everyone. There's not a one size fits all model of leadership. There isn't really a consensus of what good leadership looks like, because I think it's different in different situations. And leadership needs to be very adaptive and shift and change with the times to what's going on. The sixth axiom of zombie leadership is that leadership is a special skill limited to special people. And I think perhaps in the old days, particularly when we think about a lot of our terminology from leadership comes from the army. Leadership was probably seen as a kind of elite activity that was extraordinary, exclusive, and expensive. And again, from all the teams and leaders I've worked with, leadership isn't a special skill limited to special people. Everybody can learn how to be a leader and develop leadership skills with the right guidance and support and the right environment. And in fact, if leaders become too egocentric and think it's all about them and that they are superior to the people that they are leading, then that really creates massive problems within teams. When I was writing the book Unbridled Business, I did quite a lot of research about teams, and I love it that there's a quote in there from Nelson Mandela. And what it's really about is that great leaders are the ones that, when there is success, they give the praise to the team. But when things don't go quite to plan, then they're the ones that take responsibility for the failure of the task. Great leaders understand the power of the team and how important it is, and how they can't do it by themselves, and they don't have special skills that make them superior to everybody else. And leaders that adopt that stance, in my experience, are the ones that don't survive. The sixth axiom of zombie leadership is that leadership is always good and it's always good for everyone. So the key claim is that leadership is a universal good from which everyone benefits. And again, I don't think that's true, because we can have leaders that don't support equality and diversity, and they create tyranny. Think about somebody like Adolf Hitler as a leader. That leadership wasn't always good, and it wasn't good for everybody, that's for sure. Again, that's an underlying philosophy of zombie leadership that just isn't and doesn't stack up today. And the final axiom of zombie leadership is that people can't cope without leaders. and that everyone needs leadership, and leadership is always required for group success. And again, that just isn't a true statement anymore. I've seen many teams, self-managing teams, working together without a leader. And in fact, sometimes a leader can make things worse. They can actually help the team massively disengage. And we know from all the research that people leave bad leaders. 70% of people will leave an organization if they're not working for somebody that inspires and motivates them. So there's some real challenges here within the whole leadership space about how do we get rid of some of these outdated principles and myths that exist? Because if we keep believing these myths of things like leadership is about being an individual hero and it's not about collective influence, if we keep thinking that the best leaders are born, not made, or leadership looks the same in every context, or that strong leaders have all the answers and collaboration is a weakness, we are doing ourselves a massive disservice. And in fact, when that happens, leaders feel overwhelmed. Decisions are slow. Team members feel powerless. And leaders start drowning in tactical firefighting instead of strategic thinking. So this is when we work with leaders, I'm always passionate about how do we elevate the conversation to another level? How do we get into this strategic thinking that gets leaders out of the rut of doing and actually gets them seeing things from a bigger perspective, but more importantly is changing their attitude towards leadership so that we can debunk a number of these myths and make sure that they don't stay in place. Because all the time that we start thinking and believing these 8 axioms of zombie leadership, we can put a huge amount of investment into developing our teams and our leaders, but we're really not going to significantly move the needle on what's happening because we've got a systemic problem there. And so one of the things that came out of a number of our discussions was about the power of the GC index to help us navigate through zombie leadership. And a number of you will know that I work a lot with the GC index, and it's one of my favorite tools for helping organizations unleash the energy for impact of their team members. And I think what's really interesting when we start looking about the GC index is that because we are measuring the potential energy of an organization, we know that the energy of an organization determines its performance and its profitability. And leadership is the only variable which determines the organizational energy. So there's this direct correlation between leadership and what the energy of an organization is. And the higher the energy of the leaders, the higher the energy of the organization and the better the results. And one of my colleagues in South Africa has been doing some research which actually confirms this direct correlation between the results of a GC index team profile and the fact that it pretty much accurately predicts the organizational energy. This is really important because it means that game-changing leadership is fundamental to creating a successful business. And therefore, every leader within the organization needs to be skilled in injecting game-changing, disruptive, obsessive, imaginative, courageous and creative new energy, idea, action into the organization. We really need to have leaders on board who are always thinking, how can I reinvent business? How can I do things better or differently today? And when we've got people within our organization that are continually challenging the status quo and the way that we are doing things, then we start finding that we're getting an antidote to this zombie leadership, because we've got people in our organizations that aren't prepared to go with the status quo, and they want to do something different. They want to disrupt. I call these leaders trailblazing leaders, and they are the people that are actually ensuring that zombie leadership doesn't prevail within their businesses. It's given me a lot of food for thought, this whole concept of zombie leadership, and how the underlying fundamental principles of business in so many different areas are just fundamentally flawed. My question or my invitation to you this week is to really have a good think about these 8 axioms of zombie leadership, and where are they prevailing in your organization, and what do you need to start doing differently to reinvent the leadership in your organization? Because we don't want you to have a crumbling foundation on which you're trying to build your business. We need you to have a strong foundation in place so that everything builds on each other. And leaders are fundamental to the success of any business. Leaders are setting the culture, and leaders are helping our team members feel engaged and motivated. So without trailblazing leaders questioning what's going on and being disruptive, our organizations are always in danger of falling into this zombie leadership trap. So a lot of food for thought this week. I really hope that you found that useful and a different perspective. I've certainly enjoyed delving into this topic, and there's still a lot more that I'd like to explore. But for me, as I said, it really helped me understand that my thoughts that the old command and control structures were flawed, and for the reasons that I've stated, were absolutely justified and vilified by understanding this whole concept of zombie leadership, and actually understanding why it exists and how it's being perpetuated within organizations. And this is why sometimes it can be so difficult to make a change, and why we are crying out for bold, brave, trailblazing leaders, people that want to step up to the plate and are prepared to reinvent the whole leadership paradigm, where we move from a concept of ego-based leadership to ecosystem-based leadership, where we are harnessing the energy of our people and moving them from chaos to coherence. This whole concept of entrainment, where people are moving together just like the swallows do in a formation. There's an energy and everyone is in that flow of energy. And how that we're moving from this whole area of confusion into clarity, which is so important. And those are fundamental pillars to all of the work that I'm doing around creating great game-changing trust, unbridled adaptability, and impactful contribution within teams. If you'd like to have a conversation to explore this more, please do reach out to me. I'd love to have that conversation with you. I think it would be fascinating. And if you've got any ideas for other topics you want to talk about on the podcast, then please do let me know. Okay, I hope you have an amazing week. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes, and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today? Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes, and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners.
Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?